Ask Mapped episode 121. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray. Let me look at the camera over here. Hello there. I hope you are all having a wonderful Wednesday. I'm with two of the amazing Mapped advisors, soon to be MSHQ advisors, as we kind of do some shuffling, some rebranding, some just figuring it out. Courtney Lewis, former director of admissions at Burrell College of Osteopathic Medicine. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well. Favorite part of the week.
Yes, answering questions. I love it. And Dr. Scott Wright, former director of admissions at UT Southwestern, retired executive director at all of TMDS.
Hello,
my friend.
How are you?
I'm wonderful.
Right.
So we have two former directors of admissions in the house, and then lowly old me here hanging out. I'll do my best to hang with the experts today. So if you are new here, where did my other Instagram's over here watching nothing? Where did my other hold on one second. I lost a window. Where did it go? Oh, I know what happened. Hold on. Sorry, IG Live. There we go. Now we're back. All right. If you are new here, we take your questions directly from our YouTube channel typically. So go over to askmappd.tv. No, mappd.tv, not askmappd. mappd.tv, mappd.tv. Go ask your questions over there, and we will answer them here. So that's what we'll do. Let's rock and roll. I think we got some good ones to start already.
Awesome.
JB asks, hello, my half-length diagnostic was a 489. 1 month later and 100 hours of prep, my full length was a 497. Should I be concerned about such a low score after this much prep? I have 5 months left to prep. 489 to a 497 is a pretty big improvement.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I agree. I agree.
What do you think, Scott?
Keep going.
Lots of time.
Good trajectory. And I would say, you got 5 months left. Keep it going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Keep it rocking. Good job.
Absolutely.
All right. Keep rolling. Keep on rocking. Keep on rolling. All right. So Cameron asks, is it better to include all updates in an update letter or tailor to the school's mission? I have new pubs, posters, certifications, coursework, and volunteering experiences, but I'm worried about the length. Courtney, is less more here?
Yes. TLDR.
Yeah.
I would say gear it, be succinct, give, pertinent information. If it's just a continuation of experience hours for things that we already kind of know about or you projected into the future, we don't really need that information. It's not any really new evidence that would carry enough weight. And so be thoughtful in what you provide there and be succinct if you can.
Yeah. TLDR. These people are busy. Thousands and thousands of applications. They do not have time to read every last word.
Well, and I would say also double check that the med school that you're wanting to follow up with actually does accept updated letters, because some schools do not. They explicitly state that they will not look at it. They don't want them. They're not going in your file. And so look at the websites or call the admissions office before you just start blanket sending. Follow instructions. If it's out there, follow the instructions.
Yeah, it's such an easy, this person doesn't know how to read. Let's mark them off the list. Yeah, don't be that person. Alex asks, I recently received my first interview invite. Congrats.
Woohoo!
When it comes to answering interview questions, how long should the average response be? I want to make sure my answers are not too long or too short. the Goldilocks paradox, so I like to call it, of the interview process. Scott, is there a too long answer or a too short answer, or only an answer that is boring or doesn't answer the question?
Yeah, I think the key here is answering the question, Alex. Different questions, depending on how detailed the question is, if the question has multiple parts to it, it could vary in terms of what the length of that might be. I think you have to gauge it. You have to answer the question, and you have to not ramble on, and that's a very subjective thing. In terms of it is possible to be too short and not give, not expand enough on what you're talking about to help the interviewer understand what you're saying. It's also possible to be too long and to go on. And so I think that's the value in practicing with people that can help you know whether it's too long or too short or whatever. In that regard, whether that's at your institution, whether it's your pre-med advisor or whoever you can, get to do that. We of course do that here at Mappd, but if you don't want to, or can't use Mappd, then get friends to help you and give their input, or mentors, or anyone that is willing to help you out with that. Yeah.
I've found lately in Application Academy, we're doing lots and lots of mock interviews at this point. And whenever I finish a question, the student finishes answering the question, the first question I ask is, how do you think it went? And almost always lately, they're like, it was too long. It was too short. I'm like, why are you worried about that? Like, let's not worry about that. Let's focus on the content of the question, or content of the answer, rather. Because what I have found is that students are so in their head of like, I'm going too long, I'm going too long, I'm going too long, or that wasn't long enough, I need to ramble on some more. Like, that's distracting them from answering the question appropriately and conversationally and just naturally. They're so worked up about, am I going too long? And they start repeating themselves, and it goes longer because of that. And then they get in their head of like, oh, I just repeated myself and now I'm going longer. I need to wrap up. And it's just like, just talk, just talk with me, and don't be in your head about all this stuff.
Yeah, good point.
It's easy for me to say at this point, but
right.
Well, and there's ways you can kind of finesse your way out of it, right? If you feel like you're starting to ramble and you have a lot of thoughts still left, you can kind of end it by, I could talk on this for a long time, and just offer an ending to it, and see if they want to move on. If they want to probe deeper, then they'll ask you follow-up questions for it. But it at least puts in a break where you acknowledge that you have more information to share. You understand if you feel like you're going on longer and if you need to move on. So social awareness, you can definitely offer up something like that. I could talk about this for the full hour. And most of the time interviews are fairly short. If it's a traditional, it's probably between 20 and 40 minutes. So how much can they really ask you during that period? If it's rapid fire, 10 questions. If it's not, 3 or 4. So if you take up 15 minutes on your response, know that your interview ends in 30. And, so that's a point of reference.
I'll put one caveat on that. I've had students purposefully withhold information that helps answer the question because they assumed that the interviewer would ask follow-up questions. I'm like, no, answer the question to the best of your ability. And if they ask follow-up questions, great if they want to dig deeper, but don't withhold stuff that is going to help you answer the question just for that forced conversational flow that you're looking for.
Yeah. I think people start to ramble if they're worried if they didn't go in depth enough, or they want to fill time and not leave a lot of downtime. So don't do that. It's fine.
Yeah, it's okay. Kirk asks, what are the biggest factors I should focus on when taking a gap year? I just recorded an episode yesterday of the old Premeds podcast, episode 312 or 14 or something, one that's coming out today or next week. The question was, are there more non-traditional students now? And so I had to go back and try to find some data. And actually, the earliest data that I can find was 2014 data from the AAMC's MSQ, their matriculating student questionnaire. And at that time, the majority of students took less than 1 year between undergrad and medical school. And now it's flipped. There's been like a 10-point swing between those numbers. So there are more people. Now the question, the interpretation that pre-meds typically make is, oh, that means taking a gap is good.
It's good, right?
Is good. But that's not the only interpretation, or that's not the interpretation. Courtney, when you're looking at a student's application, evaluating it, going, okay, I see you graduated a year or 2 years ago, whatever. What is the kind of the questions that you're asking in terms of what they've been doing to determine whether or not that was a good use of time, if that is a question?
Yeah, I think, we always want to make sure that somebody is academically ready. And so the more time that goes in between you carrying a full course load and when you would potentially start medical school, we're going to kind of weigh that, especially if, you tended to kind of dip and dive with your academics and things like that. But this is a very hard question, like most of them that we get on here. This is a very hard question to answer when we don't know the other information in regards to things that we would look at in your application. So maybe for you, it would be focusing on, kind of adding some depth to your shadowing, or, having some clinical experience. Maybe it's studying more for the MCAT and really hunkering down and having a part-time clinical job doing that. Maybe it's traveling and spending some time and taking a break for your mental health before you start med school. You didn't really, you're prepped. You just need a breather before starting. So without the extra information, it's kind of hard to tell you what to focus on specifically. But just know, the longer you go out of school, outside of science and full course loads, the more it puts into question about you being able to get kind of back on the horse and start at the level that you would need to when you start your medical education.
Yeah. And just to make clear, right, these are not assumptions that you're making and not biases that you have. This is based on seeing other students in similar situations come in, like myself, who took 3 years off between undergrad and medical school and didn't take any classes. And I was like a deer in headlights going, oh, like I kind of forgot how to be a student here, right? You have seen maybe anecdotally students going through your program who have taken time off, who have struggled, and are like, okay, this is something maybe we should look at in terms of other students in the future to make sure they're ready academically.
Sure. I mean, we never want to start somebody where we had information that could lead us to believe that maybe they would struggle and they weren't really prepared, and put them in that kind of debt, and start them if they're not prepared. Yeah. However, I do want to add in, because sometimes it takes people a couple of years, a couple of cycles to get in. And so their coursework kind of, there's years that have been kind of forced gap years in that situation. And there's people that are career changers. It's not always a negative thing. I've seen so many people that have had a couple of years that come back gritty and mature, and they're really sure that this is their path. They hunker down when there's struggles just because, they've had just a little bit more life experience. So it's not always a negative. It's not always going to be a rule out factor. It's just taking in all of the information together to kind of paint the picture of where you're at as a student coming in for our cohort at that point.
And let me just add to that I think one of the keys for a gap year experience, as it is, as we talk about all the time, as it is for everything else, really, is the importance of reflection. And as you are going through the gap year experience, whatever you're doing, reflect on what you're doing. What is the value of what you're doing? Produce meaning out of that so that you can tell the admissions committee about not I just did X, Y, and Z, but what was the value of doing X, Y, and Z to me? Why was it important? What did I get out of doing X, Y, and Z over the course of this gap year or these gap years, and be able to really, both in writing and verbally, talk about those things. That's what, in my view, differentiates somebody who's just sort of doing stuff as opposed to somebody who's really getting some good value out of what it is they're doing.
Yeah. So Scott, I think there was a very wise man many years ago who said it's not the what, it's the so what. That's kind of what you're getting at.
Yes, that's correct. That wise man is, I mean, he's awesome.
Yes, I've heard. So there you go, Kirk. Bernadette. I always think of the Big Bang Theory when I see Bernadette. Yeah. Is one W on my transcript going to affect me?
Depends on what course it's in.
Yeah. Grand scheme of things, no.
Yeah.
No. If it's one of your prereqs that you actually need a grade of C or higher on, then yes. If it is not, most likely no.
Yeah.
Unless it's in like a post-bac or master's, maybe then it holds a bit more weight, because at that point you're kind of wanting those things to be a thing of the past. But most likely no.
Yeah.
Just full transparency.
And Courtney, you very much are a fan of saying, like, what is it in context to everything else, right? If this is a 4.0 student with a W on biochem randomly in there and with no other issues, and then an A when she retook it, then it's like, okay, that's weird, but everything else looks great. So obviously weirdness happens, and I'll ask her about it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, that one thing alone, typically it's when in context of like lower grades and some shadiness around other withdrawals potentially, or poorer grades, then it's like, okay, what's going on here big picture wise?
Yeah, this is an isolated incident. As long as it's not for something that you need a grade in, should be fine.
Yep. Barkley, how do medical schools view if I failed the same class more than once? All right, so here we go. Similar question to Bernadette. I got a W, let's say in OChem, Orgo, or I was going to say OrgoChem. I'm like, we can't mix those. It's one or the other. Whenever I travel, I don't know if you guys do this. Whenever I travel, I'm like, are we OChem here or are we Orgo? Because I want to make sure I speak the lingo of the town, the locals. Scott, failing, let's say it's one of those prereqs, failing the same class more than once. What's that story tell?
Yeah, it's not a good sign. This is super problematic. Even if it's not my assumption is, Barkley, and you asking this question, that it's probably a science class, may well be a prerequisite. Not a good sign. The key here, however, it doesn't mean all is lost, but it does mean that some hefty reflection on your part to understand what is going on here. Why am I not being successful in this class? I think you put to the side how do medical schools view this. What you need to be asking yourself is, why is this happening? And what do I do to get over the roadblock that this class has become to represent for me, and move beyond it? That's the most important question here. How medical schools view it is a later question. It's an important question, but I think the key here is to really reflect on why, what is going on, and to get some assistance in terms of the material, or maybe you need to study skills assessment to see what you're doing in study skills, etc. So my encouragement is to really look deeply at what's going on here.
All right. Hyatt tasks, going to community college for 2 years, then transferring to university. But I want to apply after my junior year with around a 3.5. Should I? This is an impossible question to answer. Go sign up for Mappd Pro and have all of your data in Mappd, and we can take a look at it. The advisors there are us, and we can take a look at it and give you some more detailed guidance. But there's not enough information there to really help you, unfortunately. Sierra asks, what are some leadership opportunities to look for in a remote student, not near home university campus? Okay. Remote student, not near home. Thoughts? Is there anything I'm thinking, does the location matter, or just what are some leadership opportunities to look for? Period.
Yeah, I think that this, my feeling here is that, Sierra, you're thinking about leadership in terms of being the president of the such and such club at school, or the secretary of the such and such club at school. That you're thinking about leadership in terms of school extracurricular activities. Leadership can be a lot of different things. It can be in your work experience. If you're a cashier at Target and you become the lead cashier that has to take leadership over certain things, that's leadership. So it could be in work context. It could be in a volunteer context where you take on a responsibility at a volunteer experience, where you're the chair of a committee that is looking at something or whatever. So I think don't fixate on the school part. Fixate on globally, what's available in my area, wherever you live, and what can I get involved in at a level that will allow me to get some leadership experience.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, Lee asks, I will be attending my college's annual med school application workshop this weekend. Awesome. Held for those applying next cycle. What questions do you wish pre-meds would ask instead of the obvious ones? Oh, I like this question. Courtney, what should pre-meds be asking about the medical school application process, or personal statements, pieces? What do they need to be asking?
I guess I thought about this question differently, not in terms of the application, but about the school. So let me reframe my brain really quickly. As far as the med school application questions, I guess if they're willing to give you information on kind of the flow of the application, if it's pre-screened or not, if who does the screening, if it's internally, if the faculty do the screening, if it's a committee, do they screen prior to an interview invite, things like that. Some of that may be available online, but it will give you, I guess, asking that depth of questions will give you a bit of insight into how close of a look they're going to take at your application, either prior to an interview invite, or if it's going to happen kind of post-interview invite, if they go a bit more on metrics at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then outside of the application, asking about if they can give you an example of like a weekly schedule for a student, just a day in the life. I think that will kind of give you context of what it looks like to attend there in any given didactic, which is helpful, and shows, see if that works for how you function, if it allows you enough time to kind of work around and take care of your mental and physical health as well. So I think that's helpful to know.
Yeah. Scott, anything to add?
Yeah, I kind of interpreted the question a little bit differently than Courtney did. So I would say if you're talking more about what you're going to ask your pre-med advisor in terms of their workshop for how do you do this application thing, then I would say, you want to find out all about do they have a committee letter? Do they, what are the deadlines? I mean, all those are pretty obvious questions to ask. So I don't really know.
Yeah.
The obvious questions are usually the important ones. And so, so I don't know what I would ask other than the obvious ones, frankly.
Yeah. The big thing that comes to mind for me is not necessarily a question to ask, but kind of watching as the day evolves. And is it, are they trying to force every student into kind of templated answers to everything, templated responses, kind of picking from a thesaurus of words, these types of things? Or are they letting you kind of evaluate your journey and figure out how to tell your story and trying to figure that out and see from your point of view if you're comfortable with how they're telling you to create or craft your application?
Mm-hmm.
Hi it again. When coming from a family with no previous education, having to, quote, fight for the right to party. Oh, wait, no, that's a different song. To an education and my passion for medicine be considered disadvantaged. Courtney, if you saw this, I know ACOMAS didn't have a disadvantaged essay, but potentially for a secondary response of like anything else, if a student would consider themselves disadvantaged based on being a first generation, basically, student.
Yeah, sure. I think it's open to interpretation. We leave it somewhat vague because we want to know if you've come across any barriers and if you want to talk about that and in any ways that you feel like you've been at a disadvantage. So yeah, I think that this would count if the applicant feels like it counts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to say I have an example of a student this year that I'm working with who grew up in a very conservative, religiously conservative family where women did not do things like this.
Yep. And
she really had to fight, as you're saying there, fight for the right to go to and do this. And it caused some problems in her family, but I think the family's okay with it now, but it was a struggle for her. And so I definitely think that's something that, she talked about in her application is very meaningful. And I would see it as a disadvantage, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. That came up, I think on Reddit. And I don't know, maybe it was the same student you're working with, but that question came up of like, can I mark myself disadvantaged? I want to be a physician in my family, in my culture, my religion. Like women don't pursue higher education. We are meant to stay home, all of that fun stuff. And she was like, no, like I want to pursue medicine. I want to go to undergrad. I want to go to medical school. I want to do all of this stuff. And she was kicked out of her house and was homeless for a little bit and was let back in. And the question more specifically was around, I come from a family of means, like my family's well off, but this was my internal struggle going through this, having a family that didn't support me through this, being homeless for a little bit, but still here and still fighting. And a lot of people on Reddit, of course, these are pre-meds. You have to take that with a grain of salt. A lot of these students on Reddit were like, no, that's not disadvantaged. Your family has money. How can you mark yourselves as disadvantaged? And I came in there going, heck yeah, that's a disadvantage. Like that gives a lot of context to the journey that you're on. And I think that's a good way of thinking about disadvantage.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's not just how big is your bank account, which is unfortunately how most people think of it, or a lot of people think of it.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica asks, planning to apply to start 2026, graduated with a BS with a 3.05 GPA in 2013, a Master of Science with a 3.7 in 2020. Great trend there. Will this be enough for medical schools? Hoping this shows I can handle upper level coursework. So Courtney, this is again one of those situations where it's kind of hard to answer the question with just this limited data, because we don't make decisions, or you didn't make decisions, I'm assuming, just based on numbers alone. And we have a little bit of a situation here where you were talking earlier about these gap years and gaps in education. If Jessica's starting med school in 2026, she graduated with her master's in 2020, that's a huge gap in education. And obviously, what else is she doing and all that fun stuff? What are your thoughts here, just superficially?
No, I think you nailed it. That's what I honed in on immediately, is saying that you finished your master's in 2020, but you're applying to start in 2026. That's already 6 years from your master's, which probably wasn't foundational science coursework. It may have been, just kind of additives. And so depending on the program that you were in. So I think I would look at the MCAT for reference, because I know that would be taken within, usually the last 3 years, as a way to kind of give me some point of reference on how much of that science coursework has been retained and can be pulled and tested in a formal setting. It gets tough when you start getting this many years out, I would say, because if you're super transparent and you're self-aware and you say, okay, well, what are the potential red flags, or what would be seen as a risk if they're comparing me to somebody fresh out of school with similar stats, and focus on, I would say, the positives, or addressing those things in the meantime, since you have some time before you apply again.
Yeah. And go check out Mappd, put in all of your information, and use our advisors to help guide you right there in Mappd. All right. KS, is it a taboo to mention about the death of my mom in the essay, as it really affected me and made me want to be a doc even more? I don't want to seem like I'm playing on committee's emotions to get me accepted. It's your story. It's your story. You gotta tell your story. It's definitely not taboo. It's not cliche because it's your story. It's just common. It's common for students to write about illness, injury, death, unfortunately, of loved ones, injury, illness of themselves, as reasons, as the impetus for them to go explore healthcare. It's common. So it's okay. Kyle asks, how far out are interview dates from when you receive an invite? My job schedule's out 8 weeks at a time. Well, this has changed with COVID, right? With virtual interviews, it literally could be tomorrow. They go, hey, we have an opening. Do you want an interview spot? So it's going to depend on the school, but yeah, you're going to have to be super open and transparent with your job, potentially, if you can. I hid it from my job when I was applying, and I don't know if you guys know the story. I don't tell my boss applying to medical school that I'm going for an interview when I have an interview. And then when I got in, I went and told her, I'm like, hey, Bonnie, I just want to let you know, I got into med school. I'm going whenever it was when I got my invitation. She goes, I didn't know you were applying to med school. I wish you would have told me. My dad's on faculty and is a pulmonologist at WashU. And I'm like, darn it. I could have had some ins at WashU. But then I wouldn't have met my wife and all that fun stuff. So, yeah, it's always one of those things I tell students now, like, use your network, let people know, and those who want to help you will help you and can help you. But jobs are weird because they may go, oh, you're going to leave us? You're fired now. So you got to be careful.
Mm-hmm.
Annie, how do medical schools use someone who was concurrently enrolled in a master's program and another college to finish science prereqs, since the master's class did not include those pre-med requirements? It's not uncommon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just taking classes. Just happens to be at 2 different levels of education.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on how you did in those
Yeah.
classes.
Yeah.
If you performed well, it's a non-issue.
Yeah, but you can't use it as an excuse to go, well, I did poorly because I was taking
Right.
classes of both.
Right.
Definitely.
That's right.
Billy Bobby is my care coordination volunteering, where I go into patient rooms throughout the hospital and talk about Medicare benefits considered clinical. Scott, what do you think?
I would say no, only because you're not participating in healthcare with them. It sounds more administrative to me.
Yeah. If they were talking about their car's extended warranty, would that be clinical?
No. And by the way, we've been trying to reach you about that.
I'm glad you're in the hospital. We've been trying to reach you. Yeah, Billy Bobby, I kind of side with Scott here. Probably more admin than clinical. Courtney, do you have a horse in this race?
Yeah, I would probably agree with you guys. I mean, there may be some schools that are a little bit more open to considering this since you're speaking with patients directly, but I wouldn't bank on it. I would err on the side of this not being counted. What else do you have? Making sure that you at least have some other, for sure, clinicals. And then if this ends up going one way or the other, it'll be okay.
Yeah, and I think they're depending on very specific context of what's going on. It could be, right? If this student is going in there going, okay, I see you have diabetes. How's your diabetes being controlled? Okay, great. Based on that information, here are some things with Medicare that we need to think about. Okay, what other health conditions? Like if you're talking about their health and discussing diagnoses and treatments and all of that fun stuff, then potentially more clinical than just here's a pamphlet of all of the information that you need to know and the benefits that you are able to get with Medicare. That's a completely different answer. And why it's so hard answering these questions. Is it clinical? It's hard to answer them with just superficial kind of title here and very superficial discussing Medicare benefits, right? Because it could go super in depth, in which case we may go, oh yeah, that sounds clinical.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're an admin assistant at a front desk in a medical setting, you're answering a lot of these questions, but it is administrative, even if they're the physician's patients. Because of the nature of the discussion, it's not clinical based. So it's an iffy one.
Yeah, I agree.
Macarena? Macarena. Is there a minimum on activities? For example, 3 are clinical, such as CNA, MA, volunteer opportunities, and 2 are personal. Scott, 5 things that I've been doing in my life outside of school. Seems low. What do you think?
Well, I mean, to me, I think that, again, I don't think there's enough information here to really tell us, a full picture of what's going on. I think that this could work if the clinical experiences were in depth and over a long period of time, and we're really you were consistently doing these things, and again, I think that I think this is all about reflection, and I hate to keep sort of bringing up the same thing over and over again, but I would much rather see somebody who has a lot of a longer experience and in-depth experiences in MA, and has really gotten it, really gets it, and can, as you said earlier, Ryan, can talk about the so what. Okay, you were in MA for a year and a half and did 1,000 hours. so what? You know, tell me why this is important. What is this all about to you? What's the meaning of this in your life? And what did you learn about yourself? And what did you learn about medicine going through that experience as an MA? As opposed to someone who has umpteen thousand experiences and can't iterate anything that they learned out of it. I mean, you know, I think it's all about the depth here. And that's, in my view, that's the qualitative difference between a great applicant and a good applicant, is somebody who is really able to articulate what it meant.
Yeah, agree. And I think there's probably other things you're doing that you're not thinking about putting on. And so make sure you're actually doing a good inventory of what you're spending your time on to go, why am I not putting this on my application?
Also, just a plug for ACOMIS. If you're going the DO route, they allow you to enter a lot more experiences. And so you can include, you don't have the same kind of limitations.
Yep. Yeah. So just nuts and bolts for everyone. Sorry, Veronica. AMCAS limits everyone to 15 activities. ACOMIS and TMDSAS have no limit on activities.
Right.
So something to think about. All right. Whatever that name is. My goal is neurosurgery. Oh, Courtney. So DO is kind of out of the question. Says who? And I need to secure an MD admission. Okay, great statement. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's move on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that non-question. Courtney, do you want to dispel that myth right off the bat?
That ruffled my feathers.
It ruffles my feathers. Like, that's just wrong.
I have so many of my DO students that matched into such competitive specialties that I'm just shocked that this narrative is still going on. And it's so prevalent. It's just untrue. I would say if you look at residencies, and so there's actually been articles that have come out within the past 2-3 weeks actually advocating for increased transparency and no discrimination against DOs, even more so. The only one, and I've looked it up, I've done the research, that may be a bit difficult still would be plastics. They don't seem to accept as many DOs as MDs, but other than that, it's on you. And you can go anywhere in the US and what you're involved in, the volunteer hours, if you do research, how you are on your rotations, what kind of letters you get, what kind of dean's letter you get. So it's really more on your performance as a medical student and how you make yourself stand out and how you perform. It's just not true. And I will get on my soapbox and just... I can send stats. I can send match results. It's just not true. It's just not true.
And again, this is where interpretation of data is important. Looking at match results and going, oh, plastics, for instance, doesn't match nearly as many DOs as other residencies. We can't make the conclusion that, oh, plastic surgeons, at least the program directors, don't like osteopathic students. We can't draw that conclusion. We can make some guesses and go, maybe it's because there just wasn't a good cohort of DOs applying that cycle, or the DOs who were applying maybe were arrogant and thought, I'm a DO, you should take me. Don't you know we're just as good? And you can come off super arrogant, and that doesn't look good either. Like there are reasons for these shortcomings. We don't know exactly unless we go to the program directors. And unfortunately, they're probably not going to be super open about it and go, do you have a negative bias towards osteopathic students? The majority will probably say no. And that's okay. And maybe that's true. There have been some, and I've asked questions in my specialty stories podcast series. There was only one program director. It was a program director at Northwestern that was like, we don't look at DO students. We don't need to. We have plenty of MD students, and this was pre-merger, so that was a different can of worms, and that's one program director at one program in one part of the country. That is not all programs and all residencies. You can't speak to that.
Yeah. Well,
and Courtney, just quickly to your point, there has been some potential legislation being pushed to not discriminate against DOs. I don't know if you saw, the AOA came out and SOMA came out and said, we're not in favor of this. And I'm like, I agree. Like, keep the politicians out of this world, which is why, I don't know, Courtney, if you know a little of the backstory of why the merger happened in the first place, was the government's like, why are we overseeing two residency programs and bodies? And they're like, we're going to take over. And the ACGME and the whoever, AOA, whatever, were like, no, we're going to get married. You don't need to hang out with us.
Yeah. And if money wasn't involved in the application process, there would probably, or standardized testing process, there may be more mergers, but there's business sides of it. But on the back end, we can see as a medical school, we can see who they accepted in prior years, where they came from. If they do have a preference, they could put, if they wanted to see USMLE, all of that has been taken down, I would say, in the past 3-4 years. And DO schools are just kind of starting to pick up steam and produce graduates and open. And so it's definitely changing. And it's just not true that you can't match into the specialties. I mean, my students, they matched so well. And it's just, this will get me fired up faster than anything, because give yourself an opportunity to attend school in a place where you can thrive, whether it's MD or DO. You're coming out with the same rights. You're going to have the same opportunity. It really is on you.
Yeah, and I was going to make a comment too, and because I had a student not too long ago who said, well, I was looking at lists of residency placements, and there was a lot more MD students on this list than there were DO students. And it seems to me like that part of that is there's a lot more MD schools than there are DO schools. So what you're looking for is proportionality, in addition to, you don't look at the raw numbers.
Exactly.
The number of MD graduates is 3 times as many as DO graduates. And so you can't expect that there's going to be half and half or whatever in every residency program. That's just not proportional to the number of graduates that you're seeing. And so I think there is some interpretation necessary here, and I think you really do have to kind of really look at what's going on here and listen to voices like Courtney and Ryan and myself, and really evaluate it in some real ways, and not just make assumptions.
Yeah. I apologize, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Max asks, are there any great resources for international students applying in the U.S. on an F1 visa and wanting to apply to medical school? Advice for finding clinical experience with an F1 visa. It's very, very hard. We suggest going and checking out our friends over at F1 Doctors. They're an organization that specifically helps for free international students applying to medical school here in the U.S. But yeah, when you're on a visa, you're typically very limited in terms of what you can do off campus because of that visa.
Mm-hmm.
But you can usually still volunteer. It's just jobs that are
correct,
that are harder.
Yep.
Nikki asks, I'm having issues finding where to speak to an advisor on Mappd. I do have the paid subscription. Could you show how to get there? I would love to. Thank you for allowing me to show you a little bit of Mappd. Let me I gotta adjust my setup here. 1 second. Present screen, Chrome tab, Mappd. All right. So as we show mapped here, I will log into my student demo account right there. And you will see here that in this demo account, here's my dashboard. I have all of my GPA information on here, all of my clinical experience. I can see breakdowns of the prereqs that I've done and the schools that I have on my school list in Mappd. And then under advising is where you can either add your own advisor. Right here, you can add your own advisor, and you can see here school advisor, Marty, my school advisor, random people. And then this top one will always be the Mappd advisors. And if you do not have a pro level account, or if you are out of your trial, or you're in your trial, or out of your trial, it'll ask you to sign up for the pro level account to have access to this. And here's where you can communicate with us directly in Mappd. So that is where you find the Mappd advising. Got it? Good. Get it, got it good. All right. All right. Do you think interviews will remain virtual next cycle? I may be abroad next year on a Fulbright or similar award. I was wondering if I could apply from abroad to save a year. So, Kush, probably still too early to know. A lot of schools, I think the majority are still doing virtual this year.
Mm-hmm.
My hope is that they continue to do virtual because it democratizes a lot of this process and makes it a lot more equitable for everyone. And my guess is if you applied and they weren't doing virtual and you're like, hey, I'm a really smart person on this scholarship abroad, they would probably do a virtual for you. Now that they know that virtuals work, they've historically made exceptions in the past here and there for like military members, stuff like that.
Yep.
So make it work. Go have fun.
Yeah.
Steven asks, when should I send a letter of intent to a Texas school? Interviewed in September, and it's my top choice. Any templates or guides also? Scott, letters of intent for Texas. I think with the pre-match process and the match process, my guess is letters of intent maybe have a little bit less weight potentially in Texas. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't know that that's true. I think that the process in Texas really doesn't change the dynamic of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what I would say is, my initial reaction is if you interviewed at your top choice school, then sending a letter of intent that says you're my top choice school, I will come if you make me an offer. I'm totally down. Now, if you're sending this to every school, then you're lying basically. So there's an ethical element to that. But if you're just going to send this to the one school and say you're my top school, I interviewed in September, love it, can't imagine going anywhere else, blah blah blah, then that would be fine. I would say that there really aren't any templates or guides. The key here is short, succinct, get to the point, and let that be it. You don't want to go on and on. You don't want to say why necessarily. If you want to say why, then just say, bullet point, I like this, I like this, I like this. And, it's got, if you have to scroll, not good. So, just get on it, get off of it, and let that be it.
No foreplay with this one.
No.
All right.
Okay.
All right. Luckily, we're an adult audience here. Sheeta asks, what are your suggestions for MCAT retakes? Apparently, I'm not a good test taker. I took it twice now, and each time I can't see any improvement. I wish Rachel were here to talk about kind of what to work through. But the question, Sheeta, is why aren't you seeing improvement? And what are you doing in between those retakes? Reach out to our good friends at Blueprint MCAT and maybe talk to a tutor over there for an hour and see what's going on. Because if you're not getting any improvement, then my assumption is the tactics that you're taking to study just aren't right. And so we need to fix that. But Courtney, let's say she needs to take it 4 times and she finally gets that 510 or 512 or whatever she's shooting for. Is that an issue, taking it 4 times?
Depends on the school, if we're being honest. Some will look at your first time MCAT take and see kind of where you ended up and if it's a big enough jump for them. And the reason that they do this is, again, it's a data point to use on how you sit for standardized tests, since you can take the boards hopefully once and do well there. But it's not the end all be all. I've matriculated people that have had 4 MCAT takes, but going forward at this point, I think Ryan is right, or Dr. Gray is right, that you may need to get some more guidance and kind of shift gears, whether it's becoming more familiar with the verbiage or the timing. If it's not a content issue, if you've taken all the courses and you feel like you understand the content, it's just not reflecting in your scores, then it's likely going to need some strategy and familiarity and just repeated practice, full length timed tests to kind of simulate that. But it could be any number of things. But yeah, I mean, the more times you take it, I would say the more it weighs, and the more question it puts into our mind on how many times you would need to, because essentially you're going to be taking tests for the rest of your life as a physician. Yep. So during school and post school, and most are in a standardized format. So
yeah, I don't think students really truly understand how many tests you take as a physician, both in medical school and out of medical school for the rest of your life.
Yeah, you're testing during residency, you're testing post school and getting, ongoing credit hours and things like that. You need to be a lifelong learner.
That's right.
And you're going to be tested every couple of years, essentially for the rest of your life as a physician. So,
and even in medical school, some of the courses that you're going to be taking, they're going to use shelf exams that are essentially standardized exams. And so they're not, it's not even just USMLE or the equivalent, the DO equivalent. It's going to be, even in med school courses, potentially. Yeah.
Yeah. The llama squads?
Okay. The llama squads.
The llama squads. The llama squads. I'm thinking of like the thalassemia. I'm like, the llama squad? Have my first MD interview coming up. Should I expect something different than my DO interview?
There's no way to answer this.
Yeah. I mean, if your DO interview was a traditional interview and your MD interview is an MMI, then expect something different.
They're probably not going to ask you why you're interested in osteopathic medicine.
I was gonna say that. You stole my joke. Yes.
Maybe they will. Why MD over DO?
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, they might. Yeah.
Maybe.
Good point.
But it's for the most part, I think the format is probably pretty similar because we're looking for behavioral skills, soft skills, critical thinking, professionalism.
When we as a company are doing mock interviews with students, we don't typically will say like, are you interviewing MD or DO, so that I know how to frame my questions, other than maybe I should ask why DO potentially for DO interviews.
Yep. We're looking much more at the structure of the individual school's interview. Is it open file, closed file? Is it traditional? Is it MMI? Is it structured or non-structured? Anything that about the structure of how they're going to interview is going to be helpful in sort of understanding what you're going to be facing and how that might go.
Yeah. And with that, as it always does, these hours fly by. We have come to an end. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out, watching, asking great questions. Except that one student. You can go to a DO school. Although that wasn't a question. That statement. You can go to a DO school and match in whatever you want.
He clarified.
He clarified. I know, but even his clarification was like, hey, look, 8 DOs matched into neurosurgery, so why not you? All right.
Yeah.
We could spend a whole hour.
We could, and maybe we should at a later time on the Pre-Med Years podcast. Maybe we'll do a good deep dive. Dr. Scott Wright, Courtney Lewis, thank you so much for hanging out, sharing your wisdom with everyone today. If you are interested in learning more from our advising team, go over to Mappd, sign up for Mappd app. And as we kind of work on our branding here, Mappd will just be our software moving forward. And if you want to work one-on-one with our advisors, that will be over at Medical School HQ, where it historically has always been. We're moving it back there. So go check us out anywhere you want, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Live long and prosper.